my discovery of purpose is really about finding hope in suffering. And this is a picture of me. This is me at a bit after 4 months old, and it's just after meeting my mother for the first time. So I was an adopted child, and my adoption story was actually, on balance, a pretty positive one. For a lot of people, there hasn't been great stories, but for me it worked out pretty well. But it shaped me as a person significantly. I think probably describe myself as an insider-outsider. In every group that I'm a part of, I'm both feel part of the group but not part of the group at the same time. Yeah, I have struggled with rejection, as a lot of adoptive children do over time, and have always, through that experience, had some degree of affinity with people on the edges of the communities in which we live, though of course acknowledging the enormous privilege that I have as a person at the same time. So that's my first image. Now this, if you haven't worked it out, is an orange combi van. It kind of jumps right at you. Now, this is a sort of van that you want when you're backpacking, or you're going surfing or something like that. It's not the sort of van you want when you're trying to settle into a country town and this is your parents' car. And because you want to go under the radar. This is not what you want. But this is the van that we used to go around in. And my mother, adoptive mother, when she used to settle into the new towns that we'd move into, she'd throw herself into volunteering, and we'd get around town taking all manner of people to doctor's appointments and meet all these different sorts of people. And of course, in small country towns, you've got this microcosm of society and rub shoulders with all sorts of different people, culturally homogenous, but from a class perspective, incredibly diverse. So if I wanted to get anywhere, to soccer training or see my mates, I had to go on these trips with my mother and meet all sorts of different people. And it gave me great exposure to the diversity of these wonderful places. So that really shaped me in thinking about the sort of work that I wanted to do and the sort of person that I wanted to be. This is the Backshed Cafe in Woolloomooloo, housing estate residents in that community back in the early 90s. Mary drew this picture because it was a kind of a place of refuge, and we created it for that reason. In the 90s, you had in the start of the gentrification of the inner city of Sydney, and for people who were living on the street, and again on the edges of the community, there was no place to go. Everything was being privatised and developed, and there was just nowhere to go for those folk. So this was a kind of a great place of connection for people to come together. I have to confess, despite creating this space with a group of local people in that community, my kind of strong experience from that time was an experience of absolute despair and hopelessness. Seeing people die in the streets, from being on the streets for too long, through to the heroin epidemic, and seeing too many people die of overdoses. So that was a really tough experience to kind of live with, and particularly early in my kind of working life. This is, it's hard to talk about this. This is some handprints of our son Hugh, who we only had for 7 hours. He died of pulmonary hypertension. But it was one of the experiences, the most significant experiences that really kind of that changed my life as a person. It's kind of the loss of Hugh is real for us every day, and very present in so many ways. But I guess the thing that one thing that did do for me, I still can't really explain it, but in losing Hugh, it was like a kind of a light bulb went on, or a switch was flicked for me. One of the things that I kind of really came to grips with was just the preciousness of human life, and the finite nature of that time that we have together, and that how important it is not just to spend the time we have, but to invest the time we have in things that really matter. And so that kind of changed my life in so many ways, not only kind of missing Hugh, but kind of setting me on a course to think about the things that I really want to spend my time in and how I want to make a difference. This is a great picture of the 70s. We've got a lot of 70s shots today. This is Steve Lawrence, the late Steve Lawrence, building a mud brick house at a vacation care program for the kids in La Perouse. Steve was a crazy serial social entrepreneur. I don't know if any of you know Steve, a wonderful, wonderful man. He's a mentor of mine, died a few years ago, but Steve had this incredible ability to see the can-do, the yes in every opportunity. It meant that we were doing too many things at once, and it's terrible kind of management. All that stuff was, crazy. But he was enormously inspiring. And for me, having kind of struggled with hope and despair, really kind of maxed out the hope and the opportunity in every situation. And as a result of that, had the opportunity to go back and work in Woolloomooloo and find opportunities for long-term housing for rough sleepers. That's kind of set a new way of thinking about locational homelessness, which was tremendously rewarding and exciting. But also more recently, having worked at Uniting and being responsible for medically supervised injecting centre, see the results that came out of that crisis and for MSIC, 10,000 overdoses and not one death. So, incredible kind of hope in that challenging time. Finally, I'm going to get cut off on this. But this is my adopted niece, Vinnie. Vinnie came to Australia as a refugee, and tragically, not long after, a couple of years after she was here, came with her father, but Kumar took his life, committed suicide. And that was terrible. So awful for Vinnie and for us as a family. He was a friend, as was Vinnie. But the hope of that was the way in which the community came around Vinnie and supported her and set her on a new trajectory. And that picture that you saw is of Vinnie and I at an early learning centre, a Uniting Early Learning Centre, where she worked as an early educator and has set herself on a new path of life.